Hi, I'm Seamless, and today is Friday, which means it's time for a new How to Bass. And today we're looking at a sound that I made in this project we're looking at, which is it's a Vocodex bass. It's been a while since I've done a Vocodex bass. Anyway, I'm gonna play this thing. I've played it before. It's not really new, but I talked about a different bass that was in here, and now I'm gonna talk about the Vocodex bass. So here's what the Vocodex bass sounds like. Yeah, so that should be pretty obvious. Like those bits. Let's solo that. Yeah. So notice right off, if you've seen any of the other Vocodex basses I've done in the past, at the mixer channel, there's only one mixer channel, and there's actually nothing in there. What's going on? That's because I'm doing it with a patcher. This in and of itself is not necessarily news either, but I've kind of been holding off on doing Vocodex basses and how to bass recently just because I've done a lot in the past. And truth be told, a lot of what's happening in here is not necessarily new information. But even though some of this is still going to be like rehashing of sort of old ideas, it doesn't hurt, you know, to kind of like put these kinds of things in, you know, new videos every once in a while, because every so often someone will hear this in a demo somewhere and just have no concept of how to make this sound. So here's what's happening. The coolness about doing it in Patcher like this is sort of a solution I created that was born of a problem with Patcher. That problem is that there's no sample container that's designed to work with Patcher in a way that will just play the sample. I guess you can load FPC or like Direct Wave or something, and that'll kind of work, but you don't get just the regular sampler inside Patcher. So to solve this problem, what I've done is my carriers is built of this Harmor patch. There's a lot going on with that, and a lot of fun to talk about it. And then the modulator is actually inside a Harmor, and I'm controlling it manually. That is to say, I'm automating the position of the time when I'm playing it when it's triggered. Now, the cool part about this is that I only have to play one thing. Like, I have a carrier and a modulator, and they're both being played at the same time. I can even just hit a note, and it'll generate sound, because not only is it playing the actual bass, but it's also playing the modulator when it comes out. I believe I've done some funky... Yes, so in the pitch parameter inside Harmor, I went inside the keyboard mapping, and I made it opposite like this. I made the lows high and the highs low, and completely even from one side to the other. And what this essentially does is that every single note, when you play it, comes out at exactly the same pitch. It all comes out at middle C. This is because while I did want to trigger the sample when it played, I didn't actually want to change pitch with the actual pitch. That's not something I wanted to have happen. So this ensures that when Harmor plays it, it actually will just come out at the original level, pitch level. I didn't do anything else with the sound inside Harmor. This sample is actually the I'm recording a modulator, and I'm automating just kind of around, and it's neat. It's a lot of good time. It's a good time. Now, let's look at the carrier. To do that, okay. So there's a couple things going. Actually, I'll just go inside the Vocodex to do this. So let's turn off this. Turn this on. Let me get that loudness. And note that when I have it all the way off, that it's actually still making sound. And note that also, I didn't have the low pass kind of open with this on the whole time. And that's because since I'm in Patcher, I've taken the liberty of actually just straight up separating a sub out of the original input. And then I also have a high pass on the actual Vocodex. So I'm separating it entirely and then reinforcing it manually in that regard. Now, the sound itself is kind of funky. Doesn't it sound funky? It's sort of my usual, more modern usual carrier type, where I'm trying to generate something that has lots of high frequency sharpness, but it's also very thin sounding. And I'm accomplishing that in two sort of methods. I have essentially one thing that's this sound, and another thing that's this sound. And they are actually born of the same Harmor. The Harmor itself may or may not... Yep, the Harmor itself is just a saw wave. I forget why I guess I started out thinking I was going to do something a little more complicated, but I ended up just using a saw wave. I literally could have accomplished this with a 3x oscillator if it could be loaded into Patcher or Citrus, which is a saw wave. That would have worked fine. The sound that we're getting is the result of this chorus forest and this guy down here. Now this guy is actually a bit more interesting, so I'm gonna start with this first. First off, it's being EQ'd to just be that, but that doesn't sound anything like what that would sound like if I were to do that. And that's because it's being routed through this wave shaper. Now, this, if you've been following more recent how to bases, this shape should be familiar as sort of interesting thing that I have experimented with in the past. What the wave shaper is doing with this is that it's essentially it's doing some weirdness. I'm not actually going to go super in depth into what this does. If you're curious though about it, I suggest go watching the how to base that's entitled Wave Shaping FM. It's pretty recent. I think it's in the 90s. It's not as in the 80s. And that's I put that in there, and I've created I liked that particular output of it because as you can hear, it's super duper sharp. You kind of look at it in the waveform generator window up here. Like half the wave. I'm playing a really high note because I don't have my actual keyboard open, but it's got that quality where only part of the waveform has any real high frequencies in it. Despite being the same note, it's still way sharper sounding, combined with this mess. Now this mess is also going into a similar wave shaper, I suppose. I made this project when I was having a lot of fun with that particular wave shaping process. So these are all the choruses that I'm using. Now, the sort of the general purpose of the choruses in this particular moment was to create a sort of frequency change, like in the spectrum activity, but not a credible amount. Because I don't really like how the chorus sounds when it's really open, when it's full, like full on. And you can't see all of them because I'm putting the camera in the way. Yeah, conscious of what I'm doing, I can do that. But like for example, most of these have pretty low delay times, but then the depth is pretty varied among all of them. And you look at the routing. It might look a little complicated at first, but really what's happening is that they're all just going into one after the other. There's no cross routing or feedback or any of that. Actually, there can't be feedback, but they're normally what I'll do with something like this is I will like just route all the ones into whatever else I can route it into just to see kind of what happens like that. But this is just straight up just one after the other in series, not doing anything complicated. One of them is at all the way down. By default, the cross cutoff, which is to say what half of the frequencies are active, are determined by a high frequency process, which means everything above whatever setting you set is going to be chorus, and everything below it is just going to go straight out. And this, so that one's all the way off, but the rest of them are cut off at like the 200 hertz range, which is kind of like where the snare lives. There was a reason for that. I don't remember what it was, but mostly just because I thought it sounded cool. A lot of what the decisions that I make about with effects like chorus, like flangers and phasers and all that, are mostly just kind of screwing around until I get something that I like. And later I might find out why it does it, but for the most part, those things are not super duper in your control in the first place, which is also why these kinds of effects are cool, because you're not always sure precisely what's going to happen. So then it gets distorted, and it gets layered in with the sharp version of it. And then that goes into Vocodex, along with the modulator, which sounds like this. That's also the bass going in there too. Of course, I mean, people get the idea in their head that when they listen to how the modulators sound by themselves, that I knew that like that particular cut was going to make it sound like that, and I didn't. I made those decisions with with everything engaged. I made all the actual automation in terms of where in the modulator the sound is coming from. I made that the type of decision with everything on. And also a lot of like how this is mixed and how the routing is going on and the EQing and all that, I also did with the Vocodex already being applied to everything. but for the most part, it wasn't really that complex. Since the source harmor wasn't super incredible. Then after that, I have this EQ, which is high passing everything so that the low pass bass can fit in there. And then the Maximus to kind of bring up all the frequencies to fit together. And that's pretty par for the course. And then another EQ, which is just coloring it in contrast to everything else. It's essentially this is just the mixing EQ. What's important? Oh yeah, so the actual Vocodex itself. Now, when you're using Patcher, there's kind of a consideration you have to make with plugins like this, which are designed to take in more than one input. The way that you normally do this in a regular mixer is that you would just route to more than one thing. And like, this guy is the carrier and this guy is the modulator. That's what you would do. And then they'd be in there. But when you see a single input inside Vocodex or like a limiter or something like that, it really interprets that as being a single input. So right now it's just thinks that this is input 0 and not that it can't be separated. There's no separation to be had. So to do that, you have to go in here, go to inputs, and actually add new inputs. And I add 2. And then when you go into the Vocodex, you right-click the carrier and modulator, you can actually see, okay, here, cool, there's the inputs. Those are the ones that are listed. And that's how you get this configuration. This red dot represents that there is one active parameter, and that's the pitch guy right here. So like usual, let's go over briefly what most of the parameters do inside Vocodex. So the biggest one that matters, that has the biggest impact on the sound, or there's really 2 that do, it's bandwidth and the pitch. If you think about what a vocoder does, a vocoder is kind of an additive process where it has a number of bands, in this case 47. And when the modulator passes through, it has frequencies that active at certain parts in certain bands, those bands become, audible. And then that audibleness is basically an automation of that particular frequency spectrum, which is very thin per band, that is over the carrier, so that when the modulator, moves in a certain way, that movement is more or less applied to the carrier. That's how any vocoder does its job. In this particular case, I have a pitch pretty low. Now, what the pitch represents is that the lower the input modulator is, basically it moves the bands around up or down the spectrum. So instead of actually changing the pitch of the modulator, you can just move the bands, which has the exact same effect. And that's what we do here. The other parameter is, of course, bandwidth. Kind of have to sort of set, a balance between glassy and stupid. And to get you kind of where you want to be. And where that is might be different for you. And then there's, of course, the time variables. Short time variables will get you a more watery kind of sound like we have here. And longer time variables kind of turn it into a more robot-y kind of sound. And what the time variables are essentially ADSR for attack, sustain, decay, release? Attack, decay, sustain, release? One of those is for the bands themselves. So how fast it takes for them to activate, how long they linger once they are activated. Because remember, they are essentially individual frequency gates for the carrier itself. So the carrier is always playing. And even if the modulator itself isn't, the carrier is still making sound sometimes. But you just can't hear it unless the modulator is being played with it. So that's the benefit of that. In these drop-down menus, the drop-down menus essentially represent the per band parameter for each of these parameters up top. So like if I go to bandwidth, for example, I can tell it to have lower bands or higher bandwidth per particular section of the frequencies. Which kind of blending them together has a very, kind of a very detailed impact on the sound. You can have very extremely subtle changes to things that make it all kind of add up together in ways I might not have before. And this is actually one of the reasons why Vocodex, as in my personal opinion, the best vocoder like digitally that you're going to get your hands on. Because it gives you control over pretty much every kind of parameter, including the pitch and stuff. But I didn't actually mess with a lot of that for this particular sound, because just a regular, like, it actually is very important to note that despite the fact that you can do a lot to the sound with Vocodex, the actual character of the sound that you get is going to be determined more with whatever carrier you decide and whatever modulator you decide. Those are the biggest things that are going to have the biggest impact on the sound as a whole. Vocodex just does a very good job of bringing it together, which is why you can actually do this kind of thing with any regular vocoder. There's a guy on YouTube. His name is Mac, and he did a Skrillex growl tutorial that was vocoder based in Ableton with Ableton's stock vocoder. He did a good job, and it's because he had a particularly well-made carrier, a particularly well-chosen modulator, and like that's why these sounds work as well as they do. Vocodex just lets you sort of fix some problems more if there are more problems. I really gotta be more conscious of where camera is in the lot. Yeah. Yeah, so there's nothing in the chain wise here. This guy comes out to, that's just the EQ that goes into the sharp one, and this is the sub reinforcement that goes into the Maximus way after the Vocodex. And then that's how the output goes here. That's more or less what's happening in this sound. There's not a huge much else going on. Just organizing this in a way that's more visibly easy to tell what's up. Yeah, there we go. So all up in here is carrier business, and all up in here is the modulator business. You can see a lot more thought went into kind of what the carrier is doing. But it only looks like that because I accomplished all of this inside various things that are available inside Patcher, like effects and stuff like that. But a lot of some of the older vocoder stuff I've done was accomplished using more complicated things inside, like Citrus, to make a sharper kind of carrier for things. And I do prefer the sharpness in the carrier to just make it easier to modulate, have enough things to modulate in terms of the frequency spectrum. I'll put up this patch, and I guess also the audio file that came with this, so that you guys can use it. What is it? Track sample 484. That's super helpful. But yeah, I'll put this in there. That's the recording a modulator sample. Me going, I'm recording a modulator. This is my modulator. That's what that is. And you should essentially be able to do what you want with this. The carrier itself is not being automated at all. And then the position of time here is being automated. And then pitch is also being automated. But as you can see, not really a huge lot. But let's talk about a bit about the actual practical usage of it, like what I'm doing MIDI wise, because there are a couple that are pretty important, like this guy. The effect of having like that really, really grumbly sound is just playing the carrier a lot lower than you would otherwise. Like there's regular bass level, and there's like growly bass level. But the pitch, you see, it does get modulated, but it has a pretty, gargantuan impact on the sound. But it's not like a direct control of like the sound's character. That is, that's the result of the modulator's position, if you will. But this is sort of like a character thing, which I hope that made sense what I just said words wise, because I use them. I use words. I was inspired to do this today because one of my students that I had wanted to actually look at this vocoder sound, and it occurred to me that despite the fact that I have done like 10 billion vocoder videos in the past, I haven't done one recently, and I want to say it's because people told me not to. It's because they were bored by them. I had done too many, and then I stopped. Well, then when I made a demo like this, people were just like, "How?" And I understand that it's not necessarily that they're asking how the specific like vocoder process works, because honestly, that's pretty self-explanatory most of the time. But they're mostly, talking about like mixing it wise and sort of like the post-processing and maybe like modulator choice and whatever. Because again, most of the Vocodex videos that I have done focused on what Vocodex is doing, which is important stuff, but the biggest, impact on the sound is going to be from what you choose to be your carrier and what you choose to be your modulator. Anyway, if you have any questions about any of this, let me know. And as usual, have a nice day.